Hey everybody, I feel like I need like a catchphrase for when I come in. Yabba dabba 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 da. Let's get wacky, whatever. Cool. I hope my audio is coming in clear. I'm gonna ask Solomon to please monitor my audio on Twitch just to make sure, because we got all those filters and all that stuff happening. I'm just checking in after the weekend. I really haven't even looked. Looks like we got a couple more follows. Stone Ninja, Seven Lopez, thank you for the follows. Good to see my buddy Stone Ninja giving a follow. He's pretty heavy on Twitch in the smoking weed on camera world. Alright, look, cool. Audio's coming in good. And I know that notification should be going out to the masses momentarily. Any minute here. Literally, well, any second here, within 10 seconds. On that note, I'm going to take a drink. We got a crazy topic for you guys. I guess I feel like I say that every week. That's always true.
Yeah, that's the real point. It's always true. That's why we come.
Well, the other thing, too, is, like, many of you have been just fucking courageous in sitting through all my bullshit about wave theory and physics and cognitive science and all this crazy shit when you came here to learn about magic. And I know that's what you came here for, because, let's be real. So, what does this all have to do with one another? Well, today's the day. Today's the day we start connecting the dots. Probably won't be till next week, really, that we actually make those connections. But today's the day we start connecting those dots through the figure, this one very interesting historical figure, this dude who called himself Paracelsus. That wasn't his real name. Good morning, amigo. Welcome. It's good to see that star next to you there. I'm pretty sure that means you're a sub, and that's cool. I don't know what. Cool. Well, I'm gonna customize that and make it even cooler. Yeah, today we're gonna look at this dude Paracelsus. We're gonna look at some of his ideas that were dismissed for like a long time as being completely fucking crazy. Sorghum Leather, hello and welcome. I have a broom pun, but I haven't finished my caffeine yet, so it's not gonna come out. Sorghum Leather makes brooms, so it was, it's not right here right now, but it'll later. Well, I'll be doing this for a minute. So there's this guy Paracelsus who is simultaneously like one of the last alchemists and the father of modern medicine, and a lot of his more, or generally his thinking, has been thought of as influential but kind of crazy and out there. Well, one of his big things, one of the most dismissed of his ideas, was this idea of healing with energy. And I'm going to share some videos. I was up till the wee hours trying to assemble material for today, just trying to decide what to cover. And wow, I found some crazy shit. This guy, Dr. Mike Levin, who's like, these aren't even crazy videos. Like, this isn't this dude speaking at some random conspiracy conference. He's not in some like sketchy, office studio like mine. This dude is like on stage presenting to major medical conferences and things like that. He runs an entire department at Tufts University that focuses on this stuff, and it's extremely real deal. And his whole thing, Dr. Mike Levin, is that you can basically control how cells work with electromagnetism, and he uses it for all kinds of cool stuff, everything from healing to, like, I think he makes a worm grow a salamander leg or something. I don't know. We'll watch the whole thing. It was late. We're definitely going to all learn about this together. That was my goal. I was like, I'm not going to try to pretend like I can make myself an overnight expert on making animals grow weird things with magnets. Instead, we'll learn together. But I can say that I noticed that was an interesting connection to Paracelsus. So we're going to kind of use magnetic healing. And, I don't really know anything about Reiki, but I think some of you guys do, and maybe you can teach us about that stuff, or maybe we'll just find some videos. I know there's a lot of bullshit Reiki out there. I don't necessarily think that I believe Reiki is bullshit inherently. I just think that's something there's a lot of bullshit in, like tarot and everything else, right? So we'll look at all that stuff. But we're going to start by looking at a little bit about this dude Paracelsus. I'm going to touch on it now. We'll come back to Paracelsus more later, but right now we're just going to touch on it. Just so people know who is Paracelsus. And what does he have to do? Well, we'll do... That one's a little deep. That one's a little long. Where's that Manly P. Hall Paracelsus? Okay, 10 minutes. Just to kind of get things started. Also, we're going to let people catch up, tune in, all that good stuff. NyQuil's here, so I know the East Coast is awake. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us. Dan Chen, good morning. West Coast in the house. So yeah, we're gonna do this Paracelsus video. Guys, let me know on the audio, on the volume once I play the video. Let me know on that audio. I'll adjust it for you. Just to introduce this character of Paracelsus, once we've got the character of Paracelsus established, we're going to directly connect him with magnetism and magnetism to heal. And once we've established those linkages, then I think we'll go into probably the first part. I have a 1-hour lecture on magnetic healing, again, at the university, or excuse me, like graduate school level, at like a actual university lecture. And we're gonna. It has all kinds of great video. This dude figured out. All right, spoiler alert. So he figured out. Oh, that's a different dude. All right, there's another dude who figured out how to lace. What was it? Genes into cells that made them pulse light when they fired. And so there's a whole... We'll watch those later. That's a tomorrow. That's a tomorrow or later this week in bonus time. Also, I went real deep down the rabbit hole on shungite. That stuff that is supposed to quote-unquote absorb electromagnetic radiation, EMF radiation. Turns out, definitely fucking doesn't. 100% guaranteed doesn't. Does block it, but not as well as steel. Or anything else that happens to be conductive. We'll break all that down if you guys are interested in later. But I know once we end up talking about energy and waves and healing and disease, it's kind of natural at some point to make those connections. And very often in dubious marketing, those connections are made. Like, oh, Paracelsus heals you with electromagnetic energy. It's possible. You might even say, look at the work of Dr. Mike Levin in the lab. And then be like, well, your cell phone's going to kill you, which that may be true. I'm not sure that's not true. But what I can tell you is that the solution to that is not shungite. That's the point. I'm not saying your cell phone isn't going to harm you. I'm saying that shungite isn't going to protect you from being harmed. Shout out to David Chen. Thank you for the stream like. All right. Here we go. I'm going to start introducing us to this character of Paracelsus. Again, he named himself that. He was a Swiss dude. So why he has a name like that, well, we'll see here. Okay. Here we go. Again, guys, let me know on the volume. It's just a dude reading a thing, but I'll patch over the video for you, because what the fuck? Why not?
Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. And this video is going to be on Paracelsus. An article taken from the All-Seeing Eye, Volume 3, Number 19, Wednesday, March 30, 1927. Paracelsus of Hohenheim, greatest physician of Middle Ages. The most famous physician of the Middle Ages was Theophrastus Aurelius Philippus Bombast von Hohenheim, who adopted the name of Paracelsus to indicate that he considered himself superior to the great philosopher Celsus. Paracelsus was born about 1490 and died in 1541 while still in the prime of life. His father was a physician with a none too successful practice. His mother, before her marriage, was a superintendent of a hospital. Paracelsus first studied medicine with his father, who took great pains to instruct him in the deepest mysteries of the profession. While still a youth, he associated himself with Tratomeus, abbot of Spanheim, who was a famous chemist and alchemist. From Tratomeus, the youth learned much of alchemy and the mystic philosopher's stone and elixir of life. Even his enemies are forced to admit that the attitude taken by Paracelsus in attacking the previously undisputed writings of Galen and Avicenna had a profoundly constructive effect upon the entire structure of medical science. Paracelsus declared that medical education should not come from the reading of dogmatic tomes, but from personal investigation and consideration of each individual patient. He affirmed that experimentation and not dogma should be the physician's guide. He therefore scoffed at precedent and structure out into the then uncharted field of experimental medicine and surgery. Paracelsus traveled extensively through all parts of Europe. A great part of his wanderings were alone and on foot. Those who would read the book of nature, he declared, must walk its pages with their feet. He studied with gypsies, hermits, and witches, from whom he gathered vast information concerning the use.
Please forgive the dated language. This book is from like 1920.
Of herbs and simples, amulets, talismans, and other curious remedial agencies. The cures which he effected were in many cases little short of miraculous, and while he was idolized by the poor with whom he labored, his success was gall and wormwood to the medical fraternity of his day. Paracelsus attacked the barbers, declaring that they were not qualified to perform various surgical operations, for during his time the bleeding process, which cost many a life, was largely carried out by barbers.
So that's kind of for reference. We got to talk about how medicine worked at the time, right? Before him, there was this dude Galen. Oh, shout out to Brother Jungle. Thank you for the follow, bro. Before Paracelsus, there was this dude Galen. And Galen had this idea of the four humors. You may have heard of this. The body has the four humors: the blood, the bile, the black bile, the yellow bile, and the phlegm, right? And you can find, modernized versions of that, etc. But so back then what was really popular was their idea was imbalance in these four fluidic parts of the body is what caused disease. So how do you correct imbalance? Well, you balance it. So that's where all this old stuff of bloodletting and leeches and all that stuff came from, was removing this stuff. Now that was performed at the time by primarily barbers, like the same dudes who cut your hair. Back then, the job of barber was basically the keeper of sharp stuff. You had a lot of sharp pieces of metal, and you used them on people. You would do everything from like basic to pretty moderate surgery. Now, you weren't a doctor, you didn't heal people, but you used the sharp thing to cut the thing off. So removing growths and things like that, that's all in traditional barber craft. I almost said barbarism, that's not the word. And indeed, if you talk to if you go to a barber shop, like if you have a real barber and your barber's really into being a barber, they'll know all about it. The barber pole, actually, that pole outside the barber shop that's red and white and blue, we get that from an old tradition where they would take the bandages with the blood and the antiseptic and wrap it out front to show, because like the butcher would put a pig head out front. People were illiterate. You couldn't put up signs. You had to show people what the fuck you did. So they would put up the bandages so they were white with a streak of red and blue from the antiseptic, and that's where the barber pole comes from, and every barber will tell you that too. So with that said, that was what Paracelsus was seeing. Like, you guys are just hair cutters or whatever, just cutting people to make them bleed and calling it good. That's not medicine. We'll continue.
Attacked by the medical fraternity as being an ignoramus, idiot, and disqualified to the practice because he did not possess the necessary medical degree, Paracelsus turned upon his accusers and demanded an investigation of their practices, denouncing the apothecaries for selling improper.
Okay, this guy doesn't know how to pronounce apothecaries, but he didn't write the article. He's just reading it. So we're going to let him keep reading it. But if he makes another mistake, he's going on mute and I'm reading it.
Prepared drugs and assailing the entire medical profession. The latter he publicly accused of malpractice and commercialization, declaring them to be more concerned with their fees than with...
We're going to give him that one, but that is the last one. Maybe this paragraph he was drunk for. If he does it again, I'm reading.
The lives of their patients. As may be surmised, these public denunciations precipitated upon his head the wrath of the medical profession. The condition was not improved by the fact that Paracelsus published a number of scientific books in German, a language which brought the works within the reach of the layman. This was considered decidedly unethical, but it established an important precedent, for Paracelsus was the first physician to write his books in a language so that the poor and uneducated could acquire scientific knowledge. Because of his inclination toward...
I'm going to jump in on a footnote there because clearly that trend, Solomon here said, I was curious about when that happened. And, to a large degree, it hasn't changed at all, right? If you go to the hospital, you go to the doctor, they're not going to speak to you in English. They're going to cloud it in jargon so that you feel like you can't possibly make a decision. You can't possibly know what the fuck is going on with your body. And that's what he was kind of working against in his time.
The supernatural as an element of first importance in medicine, Paracelsus was accused of heresy, lunacy, magic, and sorcery. He was the first to popularize the theories and myths concerning the nature spirits and elementals as factors in human growth and important agencies in the healing of disease. His enemies, fearing destruction if they do not destroy this intrepid and outspoken physician, tried repeatedly to disprove his assertions. They attacked every cure which he performed and tried in many ways to trick him by sending both incurables and also individuals not really suffering from any ailment to him for treatment. But they could not deceive him. He healed the incurables and exposed the frauds. To his credit, there are statistics which prove that he permanently cured such diseases as dropsy, cancer, and leprosy. The methods by which he effected these cures are unknown. His personal life has been attacked by many. There is no doubt that he had a strange and uncouth personality. While he had been accused of incessant drinking and carousing, such excuses seemed incredible in the face of his stupendous literary accomplishments. He is the author of about 60 books, which has been published in form 3 to 11 quarto volumes, containing literally thousands of pages of text. Most of his writings were dictated to his students. He was a confirmed woman hater and never married. He warned his disciples that married life was one of the greatest known causes of sorrow, disappointment, disillusionment, and death. Paracelsus apparently considered very deeply the early Kabbalistic writings of the Jews and the secret doctrines of the Platonic philosophers. His general attitude has been called Neoplatonic, although suspected by many of being a very high initiate of one of the secret schools. It has been impossible to find any confirmation for these suspicions. It is not at all improbable that the attacks made upon his personal character and integrity were largely the result of professional jealousy and are therefore not reliable. Paracelsus was a true patron of medicine. He sought to lift the science from the mummery and bungling of the mediocre and establish it as divinely inspired and divinely overshadowed science. He declared nature to be the true physician and that most doctors did more harm than good by preventing nature from having her perfect works. When asked how he amassed his knowledge if he ridiculed schools, he replied that his wisdom was from God and the invisible worlds. When they asked him for proof of it, he said the animals and the plants were proof, for they had more intelligence than men in matters of health, and yet they had never read a book or attended these medical lectures in which the ignorance of the illustrious few was disseminated to the less informed many. There are many accounts of the death of Paracelsus. His enemies declare that his death resulted from several days' debauch and took place in a nondescript tavern. The far more probable story is that he was set up by thugs in the hire of certain physicians whose reputation he was undermining. In the scuffle, he fell and fractured his skull, dying a few days later.
So, weird fact. First of all, this guy can't tell the difference between set up and set upon. And those are two very different things. And I want to take over reading, but he took the words off the screen at one point, so now I can't. Second of all, and more to the point, I don't think that we're going to go into crazy nutrition and talk about all the different crazy health doctors that I've read about that have been killed. And I'm not one of these guys who's into like alternative health and medicine is evil. But pharmaceutical companies are greedy bastards, that's a for sure. But there was this guy, so a lot of people know about Dr. Sebi, or a lot of people in the, especially like the American black community, he's known around the world. Dr. Sebi's this amazing dude, not a medical doctor, I think he was I want to say he was a workman by trade, but he realized that alkalizing diet, avoiding hybrid foods and changing your diet in a certain way is this amazing regenerative thing for health. It clears mucus out of the body, and he's purported to have cured many diseases, including AIDS. He was sued by the city of New York for claiming that he had cured AIDS, and was not convicted when he presented documentation from, I think, a hospital in Guyana, I may be misspeaking, supporting his claim. They were trying to place criminal charges on him, and he was cleared of criminal charges. So that's Dr. Sebi. Very interesting guy. I became curious about, is he the only one that ever thought of this? And I came upon this guy. He was Austrian, and I want to say his name is Erlin. But exact same concept: alkaline diet to eliminate mucus, avoid hybrid foods or man-made plants, all plant-based, same exact thing. From I want to say the 19th century. And I'm not saying that Sebi learned it from this guy. That's another guy who also said it. That guy died in a scuffle on the street. He fell and fractured his skull. So sometimes doctors die that way. And I also want to say that in those times, things like this sort of thing, a kosh, or I don't really have a slapper here, but little pocket-sized things that are made for fracturing skulls were pretty common. They were pretty common. And it would look like you slipped and cracked your skull, too. So, who did what? I'm not, this isn't Conspiracy Theory Day. I feel like that should be a Thursday thing. But today, we're just talking Paracelsus. I just wanted to put that footnote in there, because what the heck.
Later. So great was the esteem in which Paracelsus was held by the people for whom he had worked and to whom he bequeathed his all, that for many years pilgrimages were made to his grave, and as late as 1840 prayers were addressed to him when a plague was sweeping through the country. Immediately after the prayers, the plague abated. Upon his tombstone appears the following epitaph: "Here is buried Philippus Theophractus, distinguished doctor of medicine, who with wonderful art cured dire wounds, leprosy, gout, dropsy, and other contagious diseases of the body, and who gave to the poor the goods which he obtained and accumulated. In the year of our Lord, 1541, the 24th of September, he exchanged life for death." Thank you.
Cool, you don't have to hear this guy's pitch for subscription. So that's crazy, right? This is a pretty interesting character, this Paracelsus guy. So, next up, okay, let's connect Paracelsus, magic, magnetism. We kind of know who the guy is. Let's frame him in, our topic for today, shall we? Right on. So this is an excerpt from The History of Magic by Eliphas Levi. As you guys know, one of my favorite writers on magic and the occult, very influential in French occultism during the Grimoire era. This book was translated, as you see, by A.E. Waite. That's Arthur Edward Waite. You may know that name from the Rider Waite Smith tarot deck. He's the primary occultist who's involved in the Rider Waite Smith, right? So he was so influenced by Levi that he translated his work to English. Levi's a big deal. If you've heard the name Baphomet in conjunction with the goat head, the goat of Mendes, all that, we get that from Levi. Levi's books are very, if not important, then extremely influential. I think important, and I recommend them all. But so that's where we're getting this next bit from. And also it's just some random person reading. Okay, apparently they're not going to read, so I will read it aloud. There's no need to recapitulate what has been said concerning this master in our Doctrine and Ritual of Transcendental Magic, in English, Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic. changed. I sped it up because it's slow, but if I'm reading it. But something may be added on the occult medicine restored by Paracelsus. This truly universal medicine is based upon a spacious theory of light called by adepts fluid or portable gold. Light, that creative agent, the vibrations of which are the movement and life of all things. Light, latent in the universal ether, radiating about absorbing centers, which, being saturated thereby, project movement and life in their turn, so forming creative currents. So this theory basically starts with that. Light is the source of all energy. All movement requires the energy that comes from light. Light, astralized in the stars, animalized in animals, humanized in human beings. Light, which vegetates in plants, glistens in metals, produces all forms of nature, and equilibrates all by the laws of universal sympathy. This is that light which exhibits the phenomena of magnetism, divined by Paracelsus, which tinctures the blood, being released from the air as it is inhaled and discharged by the hermetic bellows of the lungs. The blood then becomes a true elixir of life, wherein ruby and magnetic globules of vital light float in a slightly gilded fluid. Obviously, this is very fancy and metaphoric, right? But we see this connection with the blood, life, energy, light in the Chinese concept of qi that we encountered and in everything else that we've kind of encountered with bodily energy, right? Magnetism being, again, at that core of how our heart, for those of us who have been with for those of you who have been with us since the early sessions when we were seeing how the heart electromagnetically works, that magnetism is kind of at that core. Those magnetic globules, indeed, that the iron in our blood has magnetic globules. So he goes on to say, these globules are actual seeds, ready to assume all forms of that world, whereof the human body is an abridgment. They can become rarefied and coagulated, so renewing the humors which circulate in the nerves and in the flesh encompassing the bones. They radiate outside, or rather in rarefying, they are drawn by the currents of light and circulate in the astral body. That interior and luminous body, which is dilated by the imagination of ecstatics, so that their blood sometimes colors objects at a distance when these have been penetrated and identified with the astral body. In a special work on occult medicine, that which is stated here will be proved, however strange and paradoxical it may seem at first sight to men of science. Such were the bases of medicine as put forward by Paracelsus. He cured by sympathy of light. He administered medicaments not to the outward material body, which is entirely passive, which can be rent and cut up without feeling anything when the astral body has been withdrawn, but to the inward medium, to that vehicle which is the source of sensations. The quintessence of these he renewed by sympathetic quintessences. For example, he healed wounds by applying powerful reactives to the spilt blood, thus sending back its physical soul and purified sap to the body. So, this is a thing, I have old Jewish cures for this kind of thing too, where like if someone was cut, you could treat them by treating either the knife that cut them or blood that spilled from the wound. You didn't have to treat the person that was cut. This is an old idea. Paracelsus supposedly did this stuff in front of nobles who were skeptical, like they were trying to disprove him. And the phrase "hair of the dog that bit you," you know that phrase that like when drink some booze in the morning, take a hair of the dog that bit you. That's the same thing. You actually can treat a dog bite, they say, by treating a hair from the dog that bit the person. That's where that phrase comes from. To cure a diseased limb, he made a limb of wax, and by willpower transferred thereto the magnetism of the diseased limb. Then he treated the wax with vitriol, iron, and fire, thus reacting by imagination and magnetic correspondence on the sick person himself, to whom the limb of wax had become an appendix and supplement. Paracelsus knew the mysteries of blood. He knew why the priests of Baal made incisions with knives in their flesh and then brought down fire from heaven. He knew why Orientals poured out their blood before a woman to inspire her with physical love. He knew how spilt blood cries for vengeance or mercy and fills the air with angels or demons. Blood is the instrument of dreams and multiplies images in the brains during sleep because it is full of the astral light. Its globules are bisexual, magnetized, and metalled. Sympathetic and repelling all forms and images in the world can be invoked from the physical soul of blood. That's just a little bit. So we're going to get into blood magic and all that stuff if you guys really need that. We sure can. We sure can. But we got to understand theory first. You know, I never give it to you easy. So, I hope you brought your popcorn, your notebooks, your thinking caps. This next one, reprogramming endogenous bioelectrical circuits, a new approach to regenerative medicine. Dr. Michael Levin at the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University. This is because, why do I need this part? Because, frankly, all that stuff sounds great, but I'm naturally skeptical. Right? Are you with me?
Yes, very much so.
Right? All that shit sounds cool.
Yeah.
But, like, that's not how science works. Medicine works on science. You can't, I'm not going to believe something that I know is not right.
Something that is not in accordance with everything else we're being taught.
Right. So, now, what remains unproven here, although maybe we'll revisit some of the material in the human bioelectric field. What we'll prove here is that electromagnetism can definitely affect cells in some crazy fucking ways, including curing diseases. I will prove that to you, have a scientist prove that to you. That's not a problem. The question then comes, can humans generate electromagnetic fields? We've already proven the piezoelectricity thing. We've done it ourselves. We've felt that. We've learned that. We've seen all the science behind that. That's piezo. We'll look at the bioelectric field and all that maybe again to confirm that this is all at least theoretically possible. And now I know that many of our regulars are like, no, dude, we already believe in this shit. You don't have to convince us. And, like, what I will say to all of us, including me, is I don't believe any of this shit until it's proven. It would be perilous to just take anything at face value. I'm going to remain skeptical and have every step of my journey. And one of the best reasons for that is because I am constantly surprised. I'm constantly amazed. I'm constantly, awed by wonder. I'm definitely open-minded and skeptical at this point, right? Like, I don't just believe anything, but there's nothing that I'm like, nah, I don't think that's possible. I used to say that a lot more than I do now. Because, you know what? The more and more I start looking for it, the more and more I find things like, oh, here's a scientist saying exactly what Paracelsus said 500 years ago that everyone said was crazy. Here we are, Dr. Michael Levin. We're not going to watch the whole thing. We'll watch, 20 or 30 minutes of it today. We'll come back, though. We'll probably need volume up on this.
But the reality is that all of the mechanisms that we deal with are incredibly ancient and highly conserved. So all of the things, and in fact I will show a little bit of data from human mesenchymal stem cells and things like this, but all of the mechanisms that we deal with were discovered back in the days of bacteria, and they exist across the tree of life, including humans. So this is not meant to be, sort of frog and worm specific stuff. I think all of this has implications for human health. The second thing is that, I was told to talk about energy medicine, and I do think this is an example of energy medicine, but not because I'm going to talk about bioelectricity. That's not the energy part. So we do not apply any electromagnetic fields. We do not deal with any sort of unusual energies, nothing like that. The reason I think this is an example of energy medicine, you're going to see it hopefully in a few minutes, is because what we are working on are strategies to manipulate biological systems in terms of information. So not rewiring the hardware, not manipulating the specific pathways that exist in the organism.
So yeah, I have to correct myself. They do not apply the electromagnetic field here, but this dude lays out the circuits. I have another video that we will watch either today or further down this week that's going to go through the electromagnetic fields. You'll see how they do it all here. It is pretty crazy how this all happens. Okay, I'm just going to shut up and watch the video.
Gene editing, these kinds of things, but actually providing inputs and motivating the system to do something that it would not otherwise do. And I think this is really fundamental in what I understand to be energy medicine, but it's not because of the bioelectric component. I think that this idea of how you manipulate complex systems for health is actually much more important than the fact that we deal with electrical signaling. So the main points of today's talk are basically that What we really need to do in order to make good on the promises of regenerative medicine is to understand decision-making by cells and tissues. So trying to motivate these living agents by inputs instead of hardware rewiring. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. A key medium of this in the living state is non-neural bioelectricity. It's a pathway that works together with all the familiar chemical signals, physical forces, and so on, that actually is how complex living systems implement the kind of software that controls their structure and function. And that what we work on is this idea of cracking this bioelectric code. And we think that by understanding the way that cells and tissues use electricity to merge themselves into higher functional units will actually make for some really interesting applications in birth defects, traumatic injury, cancer immunology, and even synthetic biology. So boiled down to one slide, everything I'm going to tell you today basically is this, that like the brain, somatic tissue network.
First of all, this isn't Photoshop. Second of all, yeah, they grew a foot out of that thing's head with this stuff. Yeah.
Works, process information, and they make decisions about anatomy, and that we can now target the system for control of really large-scale anatomical properties. Just as an example, you're going to see some weird-looking creatures. This is one of our five-legged frogs. This is not Photoshop. These are real live animals living in our lab. And the reason we have these is because this is how we test our understanding of what's going on. In other words, if we think we understand how the body structure is determined, we should be able to make alterations in those signals and have coordinated, rational control over anatomy. And this is what I'm going to show you. So our center works on a number of fundamental questions. You can see them here. One of the key ones is this connection between the genome and the anatomy. So we all know that the genomic information is very important, but actually where the structural information for the three-dimensional layout of the body comes from is not at all a trivial or a solved question. And so we're interested in understanding this. We're interested in targeting the communication process among cells that allows them to cooperate towards large-scale anatomical goals. And actually, we use a very integrated approach to this, having taken a lot of important concepts from things like computer science, artificial intelligence, and so on. So what I'm going to do today is to address some knowledge gaps. Okay, I think it's very important to point out what we don't know, and then talk about bioelectricity outside of the nervous system, and then speculate a little bit what I think is happening in the future. Okay, so knowledge gaps. So this here is a single cell. This is called the lacrimaria. Now you see that this amazing, so what he's doing is he's going around and eating the bacteria in his environment. This creature handles its physiology, its shape, its anatomy, its real-time control over its anatomical layout, and its behavior all in one cell. There's no brain, there's no nervous system. All of this is happening in one cell. And so what this shows us right away is that individual single cells are highly competent, okay? Which leaves us with an important puzzle in looking at a large-scale body such as we have. You have to ask the question, what would motivate individual cells like this to work together and cooperate towards building a much larger structure? I mean, this guy's focused on handling all of the things that sort of go on right around his surface, a very small sort of self. But then during multicellularity, they have to add up, and some of them will end up as skin cells, and they'll sit quietly on the surface of an organism to be shed at some point during a life span of the organism, but somehow they have to work together. So how does this happen? How do these things scale the boundary of the self to make much larger units that work together towards specific ends? And what I mean by that is the fact that we all start life as a single cell, but when this fertilized egg starts to divide, these progeny cells have to self-assemble. They have to self-assemble towards a very
Okay, so point as he's about to make here, why this matters to us, why do we give a shit about any of this stuff? What he's describing right here at this point, is the essence of alchemy. The idea that any metal can be turned into any metal because in some primary state they are the same before they are turned into one or the other. And manipulating that's alchemy, right? And so there's a reason that these topics seem to be swarming all together, because the principles being applied are the same. And this is a guy doing it in a lab with animals, talking about turning a jellyfish into a fucking elephant. It's the same.
specific, very complex, three-dimensional end goal. And a lot of people think about stem cells. Differentiation into cell types is not sufficient because what you see here is a tumor. This is a teratoma. This thing will have muscle. It will have hair, skin, pieces of teeth. It'll have all these various tissues where the differentiation process has gone correctly. But what makes this different from that is that the three-dimensional structure is missing. So simply getting stem cell derivatives is not sufficient. You need to have information that assembles you into a very complex morphology. And so, in fact, this is a cross-section, of course, of a normal human torso. Just look at the remarkable invariant arrangement of all the tissues relative to each other. Where is that information? You know, and of course, you look at the genome, you can't directly read out any of this from the genome. Yeah? So we have to ask, how does the information that exists in these individual cells lead to their cooperation to build something complex as this? And then, as in medicine, we would like to know if a part of this is missing, how do we get these cells to rebuild what they once built? And then as engineers, actually, we ask a further question, which is, well, can we get it to build something different? Can we use these cells and convince them to build something completely different? So one of the kind of stories that a lot of people learn in developmental biology is this sort of open loop process where you've got some gene regulatory networks. Some of these genes make proteins that do things, they interact as a kind of physics. They're sticky, you have adhesion proteins, they generate physical forces, whatever. And then there's this process of emergence, which basically means that if we have a lot of this stuff going on in parallel, somehow in the end, you're going to get something like this. You're going to get a complex morphology, okay? And for sure, all of this does occur, but it's only part of the story. And the reason it's only part of the story is that embryogenesis is reliable, but it is not hardwired. And for example, if you take an early embryo and you cut it in half, you don't get two half embryos, you get two perfectly normal monozygotic twins. By the way, you know, when we work with a lot of roboticists, and this is the envy of all of them because we don't have any machines that do this. You can't cut any of our artifacts in half and have two normal ones. You can do the opposite. You can take two mouse embryos, you can mush them together like a snowball, and you get a perfectly normal mouse out the other.
I did not know that you could make a reverse twin. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Did you realize that's what he just said?
Yeah, I'm seeing that, and that's kind of crazy.
I mean, obviously that's a 3D model, but I trust this guy. I feel like he's not full of shit. What do you guys think? You think this guy's full of shit?
Right. So this is interesting. These things are able to sort of make up for pretty radical deformations that are happening and get to the same, the same final goal at the end of it. But this is not.
All right, now I gotta talk about this guy, this little creature here. This is an axolotl. I had two axolotls. I can speak to their incredible. So my house burned down. Our house burned down when we were kids, and I had to leave the fucking axolotl tank in the house, obviously, and whatever all the toxic fumes and all that of a house burning down were in the air. Those axolotls were alive, man. They died eventually, I think. I wasn't able to move them and care for them or anything like that. I will get more, though. I've been thinking, I can't keep looking at this guy and not want one. But their ability to regenerate is pretty, I don't know. Like, I remember when I had one albino one, like what's shown here, and he got his foot stuck in the bio wheel, just this little thing, like a filter that cleans the water, and he got his little foot stuck in there, and it was all janked up, and I was like freaked out about it, and he was literally fine the next day. And it was like hanging loose, and then it was fine. They're really amazing creatures. I need more axolotls, yeah? Yeah, they're cool.
Not only for embryos, so this is regeneration. In a salamander, this thing is an axolotl, it's a Mexican salamander. This guy regenerates its limbs, its jaws, its eyes, its ovaries, its spinal cord, and portions of the brain and the heart. So here's an example. This is a natural experiment that they do all the time in an aquarium. They bite each other's legs off constantly. When the leg is missing, they will quite rapidly regenerate a proper limb, and it's indistinguishable from the original. And the most amazing thing about this, if you think about it, lots of people are working on kickstarting regeneration in human patients, of course, but the most amazing thing is not the fact that it starts. The most amazing thing is that it knows when to stop. So think about that. You know, a pathway for cranking up cell division when you've been injured, that's not, you can sort of imagine how that would work, not terribly hard. But how does it know when it's done? So it's got to have some ability to have a stored set point as far as what a normal salamander limb looks like, and to stop when it gets there. And I'll show you some more examples. This turns out to be really critical. I'll show you some examples of this. This is another creature I want to introduce you to. This is a planarian flatworm. These are not like earthworms. These are our ancestors. They have true bilateral symmetry.
Show respect to your ancestors.
They have a true brain, most of the same neurotransmitters that you and I have. These are advanced organisms. They can be cut into pieces. In fact, into any pieces. There's no slice that won't lead to regeneration. Every piece of this knows exactly what to do to make a complete worm. The record is 275 pieces or so to date. And the most amazing thing is that, so you cut it in half right here, right? This back portion will grow a new tail. This front portion will grow a new head. These cells were direct neighbors. They were sitting right next to each other until you separated them, and yet they have a completely different anatomical fate. So they have to, the cells at the wound can't tell what to do simply by virtue of their position. They have to talk to the rest of the tissue to know what they should be making, and this becomes important. By the way, these guys are immortal. There's no such thing as an old planarian. They have solved the aging problem. So if you've read these thermodynamic theories of aging that, with time errors accumulate and we all have to die, wrong. So these things are basically, the individual cells do senesce and die. The animal as a whole is immortal because it just regenerates anything that's lost. So we have worms in our lab that are in direct physical continuity with worms that were here 500 million years ago. These are literally them. They have solved that problem. So you could imagine that if we really understood regeneration, aging is one of the things that might get solved as a result of that. So regeneration is not just for these kinds of lucky model systems. Of course, the human liver is pretty regenerative. And this has always bugged me as to how the ancient Greeks knew that the liver was the one organ that was going to grow back. Kind of interesting. Deer, every year, they regrow large amounts of antler.
Yeah, and in fact, so I don't know if you remember the deer medicine I take, but one of the things, like I've taken for bad knees, there's a Chinese medicine. I won't prescribe any cures or anything like that on Twitch or any shit like that. But there's a Chinese medicine that's made basically by tincturing the freshest growing, the soft antlers. There's a lot of people who will give you, deer antler, but the deer velvet, they tincture the deer velvet. And the whole idea is that is the only mammalian tissue that regenerates. It's regenerative mammalian tissue. And it, in my experience, is quite a noticeable effect.
Antler is bone vasculature innervation. This thing grows up to 1.5 centimeters per day. Think about that, 1.5 centimeters of new bone growth per day. Okay? So this is a large adult mammal that will do this, and human children below a certain age will actually regenerate their fingertips. Okay?
What is that a painting of?
This is a painting of Prometheus being chained up on the mountain, and every day this eagle comes and he eats his liver, and the liver regenerates. Right? So we can sort of think about what kind of, back then when pretty much any kind of wound would have meant sepsis and death, like how would anybody have known that the liver would actually regenerate? I have no idea. It's kind of interesting, but that's the one organ that actually does. So what's interesting about this ability to regenerate is that it's not just for things that are missing. It really is a kind of a way to get to a particular correct body anatomy. So this is an old experiment where you could take a tail and you could graft it to the side of the salamander and where the limb should be, and over some period of time, that tail will actually remodel into a limb. So the tail tip cells will turn into fingers and so on. So these are plastic systems that continuously try to get from wherever they are to whatever the correct.
Okay, now, what does any of this have to do with Paracelsus? I'm obviously going to keep bringing this back. I'm not going to just give you guys science class and be like, here, you have to learn science now. What does this have to do with anything we're talking about? The question then becomes, we'll continue watching this because it's absolutely fucking fascinating. The question then becomes, how does it know what to form? And where Paracelsus and other, magical healers, you might call them, magnetic healers, come in is to say, well, the body has a field of some sort, a magnetic field, the auric field that they were talking about in the other thing, that the tissue grows into, and it's that field that constrains it. Now, we're going to hear what Mike Levin has to say about this, but I think what Dr. Levin is going to describe is the other side of that system. That indeed the body also has this a corded electromagnetic field that interfaces with this bigger one. And don't worry, you guys, this is all built. We have a whole week, so I'm here to give you guys the foundation, the framework, and fill in all the details so you can approach this concept on your own in greater depth. And moreover, like, we might as well actually understand this and not just do the social media thing where we learn a fact and repeat it, a factoid and repeat it without any context, right?
State is supposed to be, and that, I think, is a key target for medicine going forward. This is something that we discovered a while back, which is an interesting example of this. Here are tadpoles, and here's what a frog looks like. So every tadpole is supposed to become a frog. In order to do that, they have to rearrange their face. So the eyes have to move forward, the nostrils have to move, all these different things have to move. It's a very active process. And before, it was thought that this was kind of a hardwired process, that, you know, every tadpole looks the same, every frog looks the same. If you know what movements all the cells are supposed to make, you'll get from the beginning to the end. So what we did is we made these, and I'll show you in a minute how we make them. We made these Picasso, what we call these Picasso tadpoles. Everything's in the wrong place. The eyes are back here, the jaws are up here, the plaque, you know, everything's just all over the place. And the amazing thing is that these guys generally make pretty normal frogs. So what happens is all the different organs that start off in the wrong position don't just move a certain amount like they would have in the normal and end up in the wrong place. They actually keep moving until the whole thing rearranges itself into more or less a normal frog. So what the genetics here specifies is not a set of movements, a set of hardwired specific movements for the different organs. What it specifies is a flexible system that can keep moving things around until they get to a correct configuration. Okay. And so to this basic scheme, then, we need to add a couple of feedback loops, both in the genetics, but also in the physics, and this is the portion I'm going to tell you about, where any kind of an injury, and by the way, injuries are not just traumatic things like this. Injury could be teratogens, it could be mutation, it could be aging, it could be cancer. It's lots of different things that are threatening the anatomical integrity of the structure that will then feed back and activate various components of this morphogenetic process to try to reduce the error between what's going on now and what it's supposed to be. Now, this is very much a non-standard view of how these things work, but it makes some interesting predictions. One of the predictions, this is basically, you can think of this as pattern homeostasis. So very familiar, I'm sure, is homeostatic cycles for physiological parameters, right? Temperature, pH, all these kinds of things. This is pattern homeostasis. This is a process that seeks.
So what he's giving here basically is his theory of how this happens. I'm curious to see how it meshes with this, more traditional occult idea of this field, the auric field.
To keep the body within a particular kind of anatomical pattern. If this process exists, it suggests that rather than intervening up here, trying to manipulate at the lowest level all this, the processes that are going to percolate eventually up to here, which is what most of modern molecular medicine tries to do, is to intervene at this level. What we could do instead is to target the set point. So if you think about this process, any kind of a homeostatic process has to have a set point. It has to have some way of knowing what the correct anatomy is, and then an error minimization scheme. The simplest version is your thermostat. You have a way of setting what you want the temperature to be, and then it continuously takes measurements and then readjusts based on whatever's going on now relative to what the set point is. So if this is true, it suggests that somewhere there is at least a rough encoding of what the set point is supposed to be. And maybe instead of manipulating the cells down here, what we could do is target the set point. Maybe we could alter what it is that the cells are trying to build, not touch the cells at all, let them do what they do, which is build to the set point, but manipulate the information structure that controls this feedback step. So this is what we've been doing. And so what I've told you so far is that patterning is incredibly plastic. And the key to this is that they repair towards specific anatomical states. And this means that we need to understand not only the molecular pathways that are necessary for this to happen.
So I just want to break down what he was just talking about. I'm going to skip a little bit here too. So his theory then is that there's something inside that determines the pattern, and that when they modify that code, it'll, without touching the cell at all, just let it do its thing. Now, that thing that determines the pattern, again, according to the occult understanding, is this auric body. Whether he can find that or not has big implications for all the theories we're going to be looking at. So let's keep going.
This matters is this is critical for regenerative medicine. What we're good at is putting together things like this, basically gene regulatory networks, pathways, which genes affect which other genes, and that's great. But what we really want to understand is things like this. And there's a lot of work to do in the middle here. In fact, for most of these things, and I do this with my students all the time, if you take a paper that has these things in it and you sort of put your hand over the title and you ask them, well, what is this? Is this what shape does this make? Is it a snake, an octopus? Is it a tree? Well, what's this going to do? It's almost always really difficult to tell. Okay? So and this has practical implications when you want to repair a particular complex structure. Well, what we have are essentially information technology.
I'm just going to jump through some stuff here.
Most of what is really exciting today about molecular biomedicine is increasingly specific molecule level approaches. People are very excited about genome editing and single molecule pathways and things like this, and those are all very important, but they're all operating at the hardware level. Think about what information...
So he's going in this whole idea of, let me skip forward here. Again, instead of changing the gene or changing the cell, just giving it different information. And he's really expanding on that concept, which we don't need to get... Okay, here we go. Bioelectricity. Sweet. Go back.
Who's going to be tail, ventral, dorsal, and so on. And so the idea is to be able to crack this code, much like neuroscientists are trying to crack this code. For the bioelectricity that I'm talking about, you have to think a little bit differently in two ways. Number one, this has nothing to do with electromagnetic fields. So this is not at all about applied external radiation. There's no magnetic component to this. This is really just endogenous electrical signaling. And
again, that's stuff we are going to cover later this week.
It's not rapid spiking the way that it happens in the nervous system. It's much slower than that. And so think more like this. This is a nice example of bioelectricity. And all cells generate and receive these kind of basic electrical signals. So as I said, we can now visualize these things with these voltage-sensitive fluorescent dyes, so you can see what the cells are saying to each other. We do a lot of quantitative simulation to try to say, okay, well, here are the different channel and pump proteins that the cells have. How do those add up to different voltages? So there's a lot of computer simulation. And these things are, first of all, endogenous pre-patterns. So you can see here, so you can see here that this is one frame taken from this movie. This is a frog embryo. This is time lapse. This is a frog embryo putting its face together, and you can see all the different electrical pre-patterns. But here is one snapshot of a changing pre-pattern. This is the layout of the face. This is a subtle scaffold that tells you where the genes are going to be expressed to.
So yeah, that was it right there. He didn't make such a big deal because it's not his final point. It's my final point there. The form is determined by what he calls a bioelectric pre-pattern. That's the auric body. That's exactly what Paracelsus was talking about. That's exactly what I'd love to see how and we will see how he goes on to explain it. But yes, that quote unquote endogenous bioelectric pre-pattern, which basically just means electricity that's inside you that already has this shape. Which is, again, I hope he explains it. Let's see what he says.
To create the frog face, here's where the eye genes are going to go. Here's where the mouth is going to go. Here are where the lateral placodes are going to go. And we know that these things are absolutely instructive because if you depolarize out here and sort of hyperpolarize this region and wipe it out, then the eye will be wherever it is that you put that depolarized region. This is how we made those Picasso tadpoles that I told you about at the beginning. This pattern is what sets the expression of BMPs, frizzles, all these other genes, and you can rearrange this using either optogenetics or other mechanisms I'll talk about in a minute, and really have amazing control over the resulting anatomy. So this is a normal bioelectric pre-pattern that is required for normal patterning. This is a pathological pre-pattern. What we've done is injected some cells here with a human oncogene, and they make a tumor, and the tumor then will spread. This, in this tadpole, these cells are detected early on using this voltage dye, they have an aberrant bioelectrical signature. One of the first things that cells do when they get hit with this oncogene is they strongly depolarize, which we catch here, and then they close their electrical connections to their neighbors. This is part of what causes cells to depart from the working towards the anatomical body plan and to go off on their own as cancer-transformed cells that basically revert to their unicellular ancient past. But you can see this, and the applications for diagnostics are pretty obvious. You can see this in the living state when this happens before you actually anatomically can see that there's going to be a tumor. So these patterns are necessary.
So he just said something else there that's really huge. You can see these, he like slipped over it, because this is something that has been said about the aura for a long time.
Revert to their unicellular ancient past. But you can see this, and the applications for diagnostics are pretty obvious. You can see this in the living state when this happens before you actually anatomically can see that there's going to be a tumor.
So before you can see a tumor, it happens on this electric pre-pattern level. Again, we're talking about this auric field. And mind you, when Paracelsus is talking about magnetism, and as we're going to kind of go down this and why I talked about debunking Shungite and all that stuff is, when Paracelsus is using the word magnetism, they're talking about affecting that auric field. He's talking about affecting that auric field. It's on that level. It's not magnetism of magnets necessarily. I think there may be some overlap. We'll find out.
So these patterns are necessary and sufficient for particular kinds of morphogenetic behavior. So what we've developed are tools to manipulate these things, because it's nice to watch the patterns, but more importantly, you need to alter them and you need to re-specify them to see if they mean anything. So in any non-neural network, we have ways to do this, both genetic and pharmacological. We can open and close various channels. We can introduce new channels. We can open and close these gap junctions. We have pretty good control now over the way that cells pass electrical signals to each other. Again, remember, we do not apply electric fields. There are no electrodes. Those are very dull, blunt tools that have been used in the past. We now have molecular physiology where we can use, let's say, optogenetics to put down light.
Now, that's not to say that you can't do this with electrodes, because there's other videos, older videos. This is from February of last year. There's older videos of him kind of showing earlier research where he shows that for contrast. So they definitely do put probes in there and demonstrate that stuff. I'm pretty sure it's him doing it with brain tissue. I'll find that video.
Masks that will turn specific channels on and off. So our goal is to understand what is the meaning of these signals by altering them. I'm going to show you some examples of what you can do when you do this. So one thing you can do is we saw that eye-inducing pattern. We can put that voltage, that same pattern of voltage somewhere else. And so here we've put it on the gut of this tadpole, and sure enough, it makes an eye. The traditional master eye gene for eye development is PAX6. PAX6 does not induce eyes anywhere outside of this region. This you can put anywhere you want. You can put these eyes on the tail, in the gut, it kind of doesn't matter. What you do is you re-specify the electrical pattern for what you want the cells to build, and they will build. The important thing when we do this is that, note the modularity. We do not specify all the information that's needed to make an eye. It's very complex. It has dozens of cell types, but what will happen is when you specify a fairly simple trigger that says build an eye here, the cells go and do what they know how to do, which is to make an eye structure, and it ends up with the same, it's got the retina, lens, optic nerve, it's got all the stuff it needs.
So first of all, you start to think about all these mythological beasts and stuff like that we hear about that seem impossible. It has, like, if there was some knowledge of understanding how to manipulate this stuff, which perhaps some of these things would indicate, maybe it's not so crazy.
You can do something in planaria where here is a normal worm. You cut off the head and the tail. This middle fragment has this voltage gradient that tells the polarity of which way here's the tail, here's the head. So you can go ahead and reprogram this at the electrical level and say, I want this to be depolarized like the head. And sure enough, the cells at the blasteme will make a head, and now you get these two-headed animals.
So again, he's not using magnetic fields, he's using electricity, but he's doing this with friggin' electricity.
Or you can make no-headed animals. They're viable both. Again, modular, because we don't know how to make a planarian head. What we do know how to do now is how to say electrically, how to say build a head right here, and the cells happily do that. Notice that it's correctly scaled, so the rest of the body is functional, and so on. These things are not only structural; they're also functional. So if you were to make it, if you were to put an eye on the tail of this tadpole, we found out that these eyes can see perfectly well. They
What? What? They could grow you extra eyes that see? What?
the optic nerve that comes out connects up here in the spinal cord. This machine tests their vision. Notice they don't have any primary eyes here, and they can see quite well out of this eye. They can do vision. They can do vision learning and things like this. The plasticity of the system is quite amazing. So, what I just showed you a minute ago is that we can.
All right, I don't know how to take bets on this thing, but I just want to say, who wants to make bets? This guy has some freaky things in his lab that he hasn't told anyone about.
Radically change the anatomy of the planarian and ask it to build a head on the other end. Now, those heads that we built have very normal morphology. They have the normal head shape appropriate to that species. Can we change that? So what we found out is that you can, and in this species, you can see it's got a nice triangular head shape with little oracles out here. You cut off the head, and then you perturb that electrical network. What you can do is you can get it to make flat heads, or round heads, or normal heads. But the amazing thing is that these heads are actually the same shape as other living species of planarian, 150 million years distant. And in fact, not only the head shapes change, but actually, I don't know if you can see this, but the shape of the brain and the distribution of stem cells in the head becomes exactly like these other species. So on the fly, you can shift the morphology of these heads from the normal genomic default to the head shapes and structures of other species. And again, much like with the two.
You guys getting what this man's saying? Because if you could do it to these things that he said are like our ancestors, I'm not saying you could do it to us, but
Not saying that.
at least something in between can.
Yeah.
Some interesting shit can happen in between.
We had an animal. The genomes are wild type. There's no genomic editing here. Okay, there's nothing wrong with their genetics. These are physiological stimuli that are pushing the system towards a different anatomical goal state.
He said they didn't change the genes at all. They just used electricity to make it do different stuff.
And so, in fact, you can go further and you can make really wild types of shapes. This kind of spiky thing. This, if you can see, this is sort of like a ski hat kind of a thing with a hole in the middle. Flatworms don't even have to be flat. They can start growing into the third dimension. There are regions of this morphospace that you can reach by manipulating the.
So again, he's not talking about the electromagnetic field, but if you look at that diagram and you look at what they're doing here and you look at what we've learned about field resonance, like there's a field there. It may not be the electromagnetic one, and I think that's where the confusion is, but certainly you can affect it with electricity.
This process of cellular decision making that are not currently used by evolution. I mean, these of course are. These, to my knowledge, are not. They're probably not competitive in the wild. But the idea is that normal cells with normal species-specific genomes are actually quite happy to build completely different things if they can be motivated to do so. And so what we've been doing is trying to crack this. And what I propose is a slightly different view. Right now, what people often say is that the DNA is the software and then the cell is the hardware. I actually think there's another way to look at it, which is that the DNA is what specifies the hardware. Okay? Every cell's genome tells you what kind of ion channels, but also adhesion proteins and various other things. But let's stick with the bioelectrics. What the DNA nails down what kind of ion channels you get to have. But this is a really important lesson from engineering, which is that if for specific kinds of electrical systems, once you nail down the electrical components, that doesn't automatically determine what the information content is. So what you see here is what's called a flip-flop, which is a basic, very.
So basically, he's saying that just because you have a computer, you can run all sorts of different software on the computer. You know, what your genome then is the plan on how to build the computer. That makes sense.
Small kind of circuit that can contain one of two stable electrical states. It's a basic memory, and depending on whether you transiently put a potential here or there, you can keep information flowing in this way, or you can keep information flowing the other way, and it will contain a 0 or a 1, meaning this pattern or that pattern, without having to move any of the stuff around. There's some interesting analogies between this and living tissue. First of all, if you were to take an X-ray of this and figure out where all the components are, where all of the proteins are, so to speak, you would still not know what the information content here was. Okay? You can't recover that from the dead state. Bioelectricity is exactly the same. All of the electrical processes that I told you about disappear as soon as the cell dies. This is one reason why this stuff has lagged so far behind biochemistry and molecular biology. You can't fix it in formaldehyde and study it later. It all goes away. You have to be looking at the living state. And that information is only recoverable at the living state. The other important thing is that knowing what ion channels are here, so proteomic profiling, transcriptomic profiling, is insufficient to know the physiological state, because you don't actually know whether these channels are open and or closed and what the electrical activity is. So the DNA locks down the hardware, but now once every cell has this sort of this hardware, these multicellular sheets are actually able to drive a kind of really dynamic change in the, let me see if this, oops. Okay, that movie's not playing either. So what you would have seen up here is a computational model showing that even when all of the channels are identical in every single cell, they can actually self-organize various patterns, much like you can get in electric circuits. So the hardware does not, in fact, the specification of the hardware does not nail down the software. So this makes a prediction. We should be able to rewrite this while keeping this intact. And I've already sort of shown you that in the worm. I'm going to show you an even better example. So basically, what we can show is that here's a normal worm. So this is a one-headed planarian. It's got a head and a tail, and the head is expressing head genes. The tail is not expressing head genes. Here's another one like that. You cut this guy, you get a one-headed worm. You cut this guy, you get a two-headed worm. So now, why in the world would you get two distinct anatomical outcomes from the same kind of body, and they both have the wild-type genomic sequence? It's because in the meantime, what we've done is we've rewritten the electrical pattern that tells this thing how many heads a planarian should have.
So I feel like these guys are aura editing. Is that what's going on here?
Yes, 100%.
Does everyone feel like these guys are aura editing? I'm not endorsing any of this stuff, by the way. I don't stand on the side of the technocracy. I'm not even saying I'm neutral. I used to say I'm neutral on that. I'm on the side of magic. I'm not on the side of the technocracy, if anyone sees things that way. But that's what's going on here, right? They're aura editing, baby. This is crazy shit.
So here's what a normal pattern looks like. This is build one head on one side. Now, this is pretty messy, but what we've done is we've been able to say, okay, there's actually two heads should go here, and then if you cut it, this thing will actually make two heads. But notice something really important. This pattern right here is not a readout of what the anatomy is now, because this is still a one-headed worm. This is basically a pattern memory of what to do if you get injured in the future. This is really critical, because if I showed you that this thing had two depolarizations at either end, which it does, you'd say, well, yeah, that's obvious. The head is depolarized, so what you're seeing is basically a readout of the anatomy. That's not what this is. This is a pattern that exists in a one-headed animal, which says, what should we do if we are called upon to regenerate? If you're not called upon to regenerate, you stay like this, and there's no problem. The electrical state here does not match the current anatomical layout. It is a latent memory of what is going to happen if there is an injury in the future. So a single body is able to store at least, no doubt there are more. We've been able to nail down two of them, but I'm sure there's more. A single body is able to maintain multiple set points. Let's go back to this idea at the beginning that there's an information structure that determines what are we going to do if we need to reassert morphogenesis. There are at least two possible ones that you can keep, and both of these can be kept in the same kind of one-headed body, but they have radically different outcomes if there's an injury. Okay? So now I just a minute ago I called this thing a memory, and why would I call it a memory? So here's an important component to this, which is that if we make this two-headed worm, And usually people ask me this at about this time. If I have this two-headed worm, I cut off the primary head, I cut off this ectopic secondary head, I keep a nice normal middle fragment, it's genomically normal, what happens? I put it in plain water, what happens to it? So you would think that surely you'd get a normal worm because you got rid of this crazy ectopic tissue, the genetics are still normal, of course this thing is going to make a single-headed worm. And the reason I'm showing you this is because that's not at all what happens. When you cut this thing, this middle fragment will continue to remake two-headed animals in perpetuity. It is permanently stable. So once we make this two-headed worm, we have permanently altered the idea that this tissue has about how many heads a normal planarian should have. And it will stay true to this idea and continue to rebuilding to that set point. That set point is encoded bioelectrically. The genome of this guy is exactly the same as of this guy. Because planaria fission and regenerate, you could imagine throwing this in the Charles River, and 100 years from now, some scientists will come along, they'll pick up some two-headed worms and some one-headed worms, they'll say, ah, cool, a speciation event, let's sequence the genome and see where the change is, and of course, that's not where it is. That is not where you're going to find it. So the reason I call it a memory is because it's long-term stable, permanent as far as we can tell. It is rewritable. We can take a single-headed worm and rewrite it to two heads. We can take a two-headed worm, rewrite it back to one head. It has latency or conditional recall. I showed you a minute ago. You can have a one-headed worm with a pattern that indicates two heads. It's like a latent memory. It only becomes called upon, recalled when you injure the thing. And there are discrete possible outcomes. Okay.
If no one's seeing immediate parallels to ancestral trauma with what this man is saying right now, I don't know what to tell you. So what he's saying is that your electrical field can receive, store, and transmit changes. They forced it in the lab, but it's possible. It's what happens with cancer. That's what his whole point was. That's what happens with cancer. And after that, the thing starts growing, right? So they can detect cancer early because they detect that change. And that gets passed down, right? Like that's as cancer does. So we talk about ancestral trauma. We talk about even the influence of how do ancestors influence us. Why do we look like our ancestors? Well, he's saying why do we look like we look like is a matter of bioelectric field to start with. Well, if why we look like what we look like is a matter of bioelectric field to start with, then this whole matter of ancestors is an inherited bioelectric reality, I guess is the point I want to put forth. Interesting. We get more interesting. Let's continue.
So I'm running low on time, so I'm going to skip this other than to say that we are now building, of course, models of the electric circuits that have these interesting properties. They have multiple attractors. Mostly, they live in this one-headed attractor. You can by judicious manipulation, you can knock the system into one of these other two-head or one-head attractors. So we have a way to try to understand this. One of the important things is that this information is not local. These electrical circuits are making a decision on large, they're distributed. It's not a single cell thing. And you can see it right away. This is a frog.
So there's this other interesting thing he's talking about here is this like almost like holographic thing, right? Like it's not like the leg part of the aura or whatever he wants to call it, bioelectric field or whatever, has the information. It's just in the field somewhere and it can apply anywhere.
If we cut off a leg here, you have some bioelectrical stuff that is important for leg regeneration. I'll show you that in a minute. But the really cool thing is that the uncut leg that you never touched lights up at exactly the same position, proximal distal position. In fact, you can tell by looking at this, you can tell what happened to the other leg, what kind of damage it was, and where on the leg it was. So injury information is available throughout the body. This raises some...
He just said you can read the bioelectric field of the intact leg and find out about the injury that happened to the injured leg. And if you recall, if you've been riding with me for however long we've been broadcasting now, an hour, you definitely heard Paracelsus say the inverse, right? Interesting.
Again, some obvious implications for maybe surrogate site monitoring and diagnostics, things like this. And it's also it's also a factor in pathological conditions. One of the things we can do is turn normal pigment cells or melanocytes into melanoma. And when you do this, these are the melanocytes going crazy out here. These are the cells down here that we manipulated purely electrically. There's no oncogene here, but you can see it's not the same cell. It happens at a distance. These guys, when they get depolarized, really push the normal, genetically normal melanocytes to convert. And actually, we can use this to our advantage, and we can take embryos that are injected with human oncogenes that, let's say, a quarter of them will end up having tumors. We can knock this down quite a bit by manipulating the bioelectrics of cells on the opposite side of the animal. Again, it is not a local effect. Much like in the brain, these electrical networks are spatially distributed. The decision-making propagates. So you do not have to, in order to control tumorigenesis on this side, you can actually be manipulating bioelectrics on this side if you understand how the signal propagates. And we're now making these models. So I want to show you two very quick applications. This is what I just said. You can take perfectly normal melanocytes. They look like this. And only by transiently suppressing their ability to communicate electrically, you can see what happens. They change their shape drastically. They start to get invade. They drop into the neural tube. And, the blood vessels here. I mean, it's basically metastatic melanoma.
So they're taking a tumor, and they are partially suppressing the bioelectrics of the tumor, and that's suppressing the tumor. That's crazy, yo. That's crazy. Do you guys not think that's crazy? I think that's crazy.
We can cure this using a similar type of approach. Here's a human oncogene. Here's the tumor that it makes. You can misexpress an ion channel. The oncogene is still here, pretty strongly expressed, but there's no tumor. Because even though the oncogene is there, if you can force the cells to electrically keep connected to their neighbors and keep receiving those signals about what they should be doing in a larger structure, they will not make a tumor. They will contribute to normal tissue.
So I want to go through what he's doing and the difference between the exact difference between what he's doing and what Paracelsus is doing, because I will never mislead you guys. This guy is programming the cells to make the electrical connection, or bioelectricity is the electricity we automatically have in our bodies, starts in our heart, all this other shit. Anyway, that passes through our cells through these ion channels, and what they're doing is altering the ion channels in the cells electrically. It's unclear to me how the fuck he's doing that. We'll go back and see that. He said it's not electric. Well, the ion pumps in the cells, they're chemically altering those. The ion pumps in the cells, so the bioelectricity transmits differently. Versus the idea of using a field, but this is nonetheless proving. You want to talk about health and illness? Paracelsus cured cancer too. We just heard, right? And he believed that there were these fields. Now he called it magnetic, or at least it's been translated as magnetic. But could it be that he might have been onto something a lot like this? Is I guess what I'm getting onto for us here. I also want to highlight the basic difference between the tumor and the not tumor is whether that energetic communication, literally energetic communication, was maintained. And this is something we're going to bring with us into our meditation today. I was steering us towards that. Let's keep going.
This is an example of birth defect repair. So here's a normal frog brain. So here's forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. And what you can do is you can hit these embryos with either teratogens, so we're talking nicotine, alcohol, things that cause pretty nasty brain defects, or mutations in important neurogenesis genes. So let's say Notch. Notch is a critical neurogenesis gene. When you introduce a dominant Notch mutation, look what happens. Yeah, the forebrain is basically gone. The midbrain and hindbrain are a big bubble. It's just a complete mess. They have no behavior. They just sort of lay there. What we can do is on top of this, on top of any of these interventions, we can introduce a particular ion channel that we have calculated using our model will reinforce the normal brain pre-pattern. I had shown you a facial pre-pattern before. There's a similar pre-pattern that controls the position of the brain. If you force that pattern, then despite the fact that all of these things have happened, you can get quite normal animals, and they're normal not only in their brain structure, but also in their IQ. So their learning rate goes back to normal. So you can really repair or rescue this kind of situation. It's fairly remarkable that you can rescue from a dominant mutation in a key neurogenesis gene. So this is hope for us in biomedical approaches that by appropriate interventions in the electrophysiological decision making, you can actually make up for some defects that might even be at the basic genetic level. So in the last minute or so, I just want to tell you where I think this is going. We've done a lot of this now with David Kaplan's group in human cells, cardiomyocytes, and so on. Most of these things seem the same, although in culture with human cells, you don't see the same kind of exciting of drugs in a cocktail. With tissue, it's quite similar. Remarkable that you can rescue from a dominant mutation in a key neurogenesis gene. So this is hope for us in biomedical approaches that by appropriate interventions in the electrophysiological decision making, you can actually make up for some defects that might even be at the basic genetic level. So in the last minute or so, I just want to tell you.
All right, guys, I rewound too far. I was just looking for a specific slide. There we go. Electroceuticals beyond electrodes and CNS. Here we go.
Quite similar. What we now have is this idea of putting together a tool, a computational platform to help people pick electroceutical cocktails for their own specific applications. So basically, by using existing ion channel expression data, so let's say you're interested in some particular tissue, let's say kidney or something, you can look it up, find out what channels are expressed. Those are your potential targets to be opened and closed. You have an understanding of what bioelectric state is needed to make a particular organ. We have a simulator that is able to show you what would happen if you turn each of these channels on and off. And then by running through this, the system generates basically a suggested combination of cocktails, of drugs in a cocktail, which you can then find off the shelf. Something like 20% of all drugs are ion channel drugs. Many of these things are already in human use, so people take them for.
Let's again bring this back to Paracelsus, the guy who invented the modern idea of pharmacy. He was thinking in terms of this stuff.
Epilepsy, for cardiac arrhythmias, and so on. So I think the path to application will be fairly easy for some of these things once this is complete and once we understand what channels do you want to open and close for any particular application. And it's not trivial because these electric circuits are complex, and the patterning outcomes of shutting these things on and off are not, you can't just sort of estimate them in your head. There has to be some serious computational modeling. So in the end, what I've told you is that there's...
The other thing that he definitely should highlight more is that these are drugs that people are already taking that are fucking with these majorly important computational channels, and nobody else knows about these computational channels.
There's physiological software layer that sits between the genotype and the anatomy, and that targeting this is really important. And I think evolution discovered very early on that bioelectric signaling is a really convenient medium for computation and memory. Bacterial biofilms already do some of this. So it was here from the dawn of life, this idea that you can use electrical circuits for making complex integrated decisions. I think that cracking this bioelectric code is really going to help us understand how to rewrite these pattern memories and convince cells to build things that we don't know how to build from scratch. And this idea of this biological compiler is something that we're working on with new machine learning tools that are coming online. And actually, I don't have time to talk about it, but this links a lot to our work on basal cognition and really looking at how non-neural cells store memories, make decisions, and so on. There's kind of a smooth continuum between this stuff that goes on in the body and the subsequent development of cognitive processes in first primitive brains and then complex brains.
Oh, when I call this guy the technocracy, he is involved in other research to build, I guess, androids. What happens if you give a robot a living brain? Is that it become an android then? Is that a cyborg?
Bad stuff. I'll call that bad stuff.
Which one is which though? There's a difference between these things. I think it's a cyborg. It's a cybernetic organism. No. A cyborg is a human that gets robot parts.
Right.
So then that maybe is an android.
I think that's an android.
Well, that's so he's making androids and shit too. But yeah, he puts it all on YouTube, and this is no Alex Jones shit, right? Like this is obviously what's being researched right now. Thank you all for hanging with me through that, because that was a lot there. We unpacked a lot. I don't know. I definitely didn't get all of it. I hope you guys got some of it, and together we can kind of put it all together. But the big picture that I took away from that is, yeah, there's this basic bioelectric field, right? There's this shape that is determined through the way electricity moves through the body. This guy, by the way, is also an acupuncturist. That guy that just spoke. The guy's making I think it's him that is. One of these guys I was looking at. I don't want to misspeak. But when we get into acupuncture, get into the other routes to manipulating the bioelectricity. Now, in this lab research, they're only affecting the ion channels through drugs because that's what they're researching. But when you look into bioelectricity, which we will continue to through the week, we start to see some other interesting interactions. So I hope that was not too boring and not too much like school. But again, I hope it was worth it. I hope that it was worth the investment of your time, because you are here investing your time. So with that, we're going to meditate. If you're here for the meditation, now's the time. If there's someone who was like, well, I'm here for the meditation, not the science, tell them to come back. We're going to meditate. We're going to change a couple things. I think we're going to try something a little different. A little bit different. But I'll let the lag catch up and make sure that those who are ready to meditate are meditating, and those who are not are not. And then hopefully the other piece is that I hope everyone who's been rocking with us now for, since April is connecting a lot of dots on everything that we've put together. Because we looked at bioelectricity a few different ways. We looked at the human bioelectric field, all this stuff. So it should all be sort of coming together. And then if you're familiar with some of our teachings on occultism, the right hand being connected to the left foot, the left hand connected to the right foot, that kind of thing. You should be visually starting to connect some of these things. And if I am lucky, and I can find it, the temple library has a pamphlet. Would maybe, dang it. I'm going to see if I can order it, because I do think it got loaned out and not returned some time ago. Unless I have a backup copy of it here. No, I'm going to have to look for it. But it's called Occult Anatomy. I'll try to get a copy of it right now. And it talks about the auric field and all this stuff, and it's a good resource. It's a concept I want to share with everyone. Occult Anatomy of Man. There it is. Yes, here we are. These are the ones I want. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I will get all of these. So I will download that. It starts to talk about, when we talk about the astrological correspondences of the organs and things like that, we're talking about these energetic correspondences, and we get into occult medicines and things like that. We're talking about these concepts. So I hope this is making sense and this is valuable for everyone, and you're not just like, man, I feel bad for this guy because he's putting on these weird YouTube videos that only 1,000 people have seen, and I guess, By the way, I had to bend over to pick something up, because you see my next follower goal, we're 4 from it. We hit 146 here, thanks to Brother Jungle, who gave us a follow today. Boom, yeah. This is a mushroom. Had this nearly a year, actually, this particular one. It's ready to go in my body and have tarot cards read upon it. But it's up to you guys. 4 more follows to make that happen. With all that said, let's talk about meditation. I got off topic looking at this Manly P. Hall thing. Brother.
Yes.
What did you? Can we recap your reflections on what we just witnessed? I realized that it was highly technical.
There's a lot.
There's a lot, right? But this is pretty interesting, right?
That's an understatement.
Tell me your responses.
There's. I mean, it's kind of all there. Like, there's nothing that I can speak past this. This is a universal and a biological and even in the nature of reality, an understanding that I have not remotely experienced. This is very alien to any formal education that I have ever received.
And you talk a little bit about your educational background. You're a dropout now, but
no, not anymore.
Okay. Well,
I go back next semester.
Nonetheless, you're going the way of the rogue scholar, but you're very well educated. I guess is the point that I want to get across.
Semester out from a BS in finance.
But you were studying chemistry.
Chemistry, yes. Been very interested in the natural sciences for a very long time. Got pretty deep into mathematics.
Super nerdy kid is the main point. That's what you need to know. He's a super nerdy kid, and he doesn't really believe. I mean, if I would have told you yesterday, well, I guess you're become open-minded from what you've seen here.
Yes, very much so.
But
and I've come to learn to take what you say with more truth.
If another brother, if Carl came up to you yesterday and told you, all the bodies, you could regrow limbs if you could control the electromagnetic field of the body or the bioelectric field of the body, how would you respond to that assertion?
Dismissive at best.
Dismissive at best. How do you respond to that assertion now?
With curiosity at worst.
At worst. Do you find it plausible?
I find it enticingly plausible.
That's what I'm shooting for. Enticingly plausible. All right. All right. Cool. So I have brought up a picture here for everybody. Let's do it bigger. That's it. That's the human bioelectric field, in essence. Again, you're gonna have to just take me on my word if you didn't see the earlier videos about how there's one piece of one atom or whatever of magnetic iron in your heart that makes the whole shit happen. But we can watch that one again if you want. So that's where it's all centered. So we've recently meditated into our bones. If you've been with us for a while, we've meditated into our breath. In this one, we're going to meditate into our hearts. And try to really sense those fields. And the reason I've brought up this graphic for us here is because the shape is non-incidental, right? Like that shape is truly the shape of the field. It's not just a cool computer graphic. We'll, I guess, as we go further on our journey this week, look at this stuff more and more. Again, I don't believe in woo shit. He doesn't believe in woo shit. I'm open to things, but actually I promised you this gift, so I'm not going to let you go without it. Before we do the meditation, one more video. Shungite. You guys need to know, Shungite don't do shit. Shungite don't do shit. You can just take my word on it, or we can watch this thing where this dude does a really good test. It's not that he doesn't do shit, excuse me. It's that Shungite, he uses an EMF detector like so. He has a router, which is his electromagnetic source. And this guy, this channel that I'm showing you right here, scottystech.info, very good sciencey guy. Generally, all his stuff is really on point. Tech guy. He does have a bunch of EMF stuff. And so he covers it really well from both sides, and he breaks out all the science stuff and tests it. It's pretty cool. So I don't know if he has an EMF playlist. No, we'll have to find that. But he did test. He tests these units, these Q-Link units, and he says these work, and claims he's not getting kickbacks from them and all that stuff. I don't know. But here it is. This is the Q-Link. I don't know. He's got a Shungite video. So he's got all these Q-Link links. He really likes this Q-Link thing. I don't know what it is, but if you go to scottystech.info and Shungite, I'll pull it up. There it is. As to whether it eats electromagnetic radiation was the question. And he proves that, first of all, if it ate it, if it absorbed it, which is the argument that people make, then you can take your radioactive thing and put the Shungite next to it, and it should absorb it, and the meter wouldn't get it. But that's not what happens. If you put it between it and the meter, then the meter doesn't get it. And he's saying, well, that's because it's reflecting it. And he then goes on to demonstrate. I'll just kind of cut into the video here. And he tries all these different shapes and this and that and the other, right? He demonstrates a bar of steel versus Shungite. And there are some promising things until he compares them head on. Like, you know, a little piece of Shungite doesn't work, but when he uses a big-ass pyramid, it works. And then you're like, oh, maybe it's the sweetness of the pyramid. But actually it turns out it's the size and the mass of the pyramid. Because then
Because what appears to be happening is, if I have this EMF meter and it's near the Wi-Fi antenna, and I put a piece of Shungite in between, it's not actually absorbing necessarily. This is a piece of conductive material, and all conductive materials will sometimes absorb and re-radiate the radio waves, in this case the Wi-Fi waves. In some cases it will, some waves will pass and it will actually reflect the waves back. So if I can get similar results with this piece of Shungite and this piece of steel, then we can't say that this is actually absorbing EMF. Furthermore, I just demonstrated that when I've got my meter here and I've got the piece of Shungite anywhere near it, it obviously isn't absorbing anything because I have to put it directly between the EMF meter and the antenna. So basically what that means is that Shungite is not actually absorbing EMFs. At least based on my quick and dirty test here, there is nothing particularly magical about Shungite in terms of absorbing EMF. Now, having said that, you may recall that I did a video up here on the Q-Link.
he also, by the way, debunks in this the idea of fullerenes being in some great concentration in Shungite. And that's in the beginning of this. If you're a real Shungite fan, you might be interested in that. I'll link this video. I'll drop it in the Discord. Hey, by the way, if you dig this kind of stuff, join our Discord. It's a fun place. Shungite debunk video is what I'll entitle it. There it is. It is in the Discord. Now, and again, it's not to say Shungite doesn't do anything, but it doesn't absorb EMFs, and it doesn't contain any great concentration of fullerenes. So whatever it does doesn't have to do with those two things.
You may also notice that I'm still wearing.
Yeah, he loves this Q-Link thing. And he's kind of shilling for it hard. And it does start with the letter Q, so I'm suspicious if I'm being real.
Yikes, it seems to actually do something. It seems to actually help me. But there are teardown videos of the Q-Link, and inside the Q-Link, there's some little crystal-like looking things and this quasi-circuit board looking thing, and then just a coil of copper wire around it. In terms of electronics, electrical circuits, I have no idea how the Q-Link might work. And of course, the people who make them are not saying what it is that apparently makes them work, assuming that they work at all. Except my personal experience with the Q-Link is that yes, I actually see a difference. So the point of this video is not to say don't use Shungite. The point is to say that all of the information that's out there about Shungite, that it absorbs EMFs, that it's loaded with fullerenes, most of that information is apparently dead wrong. That doesn't mean that Shungite doesn't work. I know people who, they had arthritis in their wrists and their hands, and they absolutely swore by copper bracelets. They'd say, I put that copper bracelet on and the pain would go away, my fingers are more flexible, blah, blah, blah. Now, should I walk in there and say, well, there's no scientific evidence that wearing copper bracelets fixes you should take a drug instead? You know, even if the effects of these things are because we believe they work, even if the effect is basically mind over body, why on earth would I tell that person that's not scientific, stop wearing your copper bracelet? If it works, use it. How is that a bad thing? So I'm a little bit dismayed actually, because I was kind of expecting to see something really interesting in terms of shungite absorbing EMF. And as I just showed, it doesn't seem to be absorbing anything. It seems to be reflecting or blocking, just like any conductive piece of metal would. And furthermore, everyone talks about shungite having fullerenes in them, and the actual quantity in real shungite is like so infinitesimally small that in the shungite that we buy from, say, Amazon, it's going to be even lower. So basically, there's a lot of bunk out there about shungite, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if you have, you know, like a pendant like this one, and you're wearing it around your neck, you should stop using it. Because as I said in my Q-Link video, you know, if you use something and it works for you, then get down with your bad self.
So, interestingly magical at the end. Morningstar wants to know where or what is a Discord. So Discord is kind of like it's like a chat forum thing, and if you want to get connected with it, is if you look at twitch.tv/HoodooMoses, it's the link right next to the screen. At least when I watch on my phone it is. I think on the browser it's right below, but it'll say like join the Discord. And just click that, and you can do it right through your browser. There's an app for your phone, there's an app for your computer if you want to do it like that. So for my shungite fans out there, I don't know what to tell you. That video debunks it pretty good. I promised it. I delivered it. I spent last night finding it. I hope you enjoy it. Now, all that said, this is a thing. This is a real thing. The human bioelectric field is real. It is a real consequence of having a body. We have one. We can become in tune with it. I may not be able to because I just drank this whole energy drink, but humans can become in tune with it. Or maybe I'll definitely be able to because I drank the whole energy drink. I'm not sure. Humans can become in tune with it. And we're going to try to become in tune with it momentarily here. Now, give me a moment. I'm going to... Let's see. We watched that already. Cool. Alpha waves. Have we done alpha waves? This is theta. Alpha wave. We've done delta. We've done theta.
I think we've done alpha once.
Because I see a little bit of alpha done here. Did we not like it?
No, I think we just only did it once. I think we did it the last time we did this energy field.
Okay. That would make sense.
Yeah.
That would make sense. We should watch this again.
That's not a bad idea.
Should we watch it now? No, let's go into meditation now. We've taken enough of these good people time. Tomorrow we'll jump into that. Okay, alpha wave, hang on. Oh yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Alright, gang. Alpha wave, energy meditation. Cool, Morningstar. You found the Discord. That's what's up. Yeah, join that. That's where, like, I post all the videos and we have the ongoing discussions, all that good stuff. Yeah, this is where it happens. 24 hours a day. Somebody's in there. If it's not me, it's, you know, we've got the community. Join the community. Join the conversation. It's always going on. Cool. So, alpha waves lined up, ready to go. This is going to give us super focus. And what we're going to focus on in this state is, again, our hearts. Not the heartbeat, not the mechanical pumping, but that energetic field that surrounds that and how it projects outwards, those waves of energy perpetuating through our body, kind of along this course, right? And there's, you know, this is a cross section of a donut. You know, there's the big outer donut is the outer edge of this field. There's a little inner donut ring thing going on here. Jelly donut inside jelly donut, as you might know. Cool. pump up the beats, so to speak. There we go. Man, I have cool stuff open in my browser. Generally, always. Here we go. Alpha wave frequency. Well, we're not going to do 90 minutes. We're going to get my phone.
Waves.
We're going to get my phone and set the timer, which I have to confess, guys, I have forgotten the timer a bunch. I've forgotten a timer. I'm not going to forget it this time. I'll sit there and we'll meditate for a while, and I'll sit up. If you're watching the camera, you'll see me do it. And I'll go and look at the phone and be like, and just set a time. But I'm not forgetting it, or I'll forget to press play. I'm not forgetting it.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Okay, ready, gang? Here we go. Beats are on. And...
Let's get our field up, too.
What's that?
Let's get our field up.
Field up?
The picture.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Should be the next tab.
Yeah, it's this one. It's this one. There you go. Field up. I wish I had an animation. Maybe I'll find one. Or if anyone's watching this and would like to make one,
We can find a GIF.
you'll get a huge shout out for that. Oh, the alpha's something. Okay, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. Turn it down on your end if it's too loud.
So juicy.
That's powerful. Okay, gang. Best experience through headphones. Again, focus on your heart electric field. This is cool. I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. So once you've got a sense of that field, sort of the shape of it, notice how it's moving, and notice what speeding it up and slowing it down is like. Don't get crazy with it, but just see how much control you can have over it. My hearing is all weird. Is everyone else's hearing all weird? One thing that I noticed with that meditation, I don't know if you've noticed this. I don't know if you all have noticed this. But with that meditation, I hear a lot of like pops, like click. You know what I'm talking about? Like furniture settling and stuff like that. And those are always things that I notice and take note of during spiritual practice. I notice more of when we're working the altar's hard and stuff like that. And, it's energy discharge, spiritually speaking. That's what we can consider it. But during those energy meditations, I notice them very loud and like almost like knuckles, like big pops. Do you guys know what I'm talking about out there? I think you do. You said you've been hearing that in your home. You know what I'm talking about? Where just like the furniture or the wood or the plastic will just like pop or creak. It's almost like I don't even know what to call it.
A spiritual simmer.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know what the normal term for that is. Like the non-spiritual term. There must be a term for it and some explanation for it, which I'll try to look up and find. But I definitely notice that more when I'm working spiritually and when I do that meditation, definitely. Just that. And I want to say, in my understanding, my belief, let's say my belief, because I'm a fool, so I'm allowed to believe stupid things. Understanding speaks to some knowledge. So in my belief, when we hear about seances and table rapping and things like that were later exposed to be people knocking on tables and such, I believe they're talking about that stuff. Those pops and knocks and all those things that are happening, what we're experiencing when we're having spiritual experiences, not what later imposters tried to replicate by actually knocking on tables. That's what I believe. And I think the evidence is there for all who want to believe for themselves. Whew. All right, that was fun times, guys. Let's we ran real late today. This is a real long stream because there's a lot to cover. Woof. Let's assume the position for those of you joining us for the first time. We assume this crazy Y funnel shape when we pray for multiple reasons, but not in the least because we'll say, we'll go through all of it, I guess. The three usuals. One, we learned from our study of Tai Chi that this is how we funnel the heavenly energy inwards. Second, when we think of how our ancestors prayed, they assumed, this posture. Third, we kind of do this all day, so we might as well balance that out. And fourth, when we started this journey of watching stuff together, learning every morning, we watched a video about how your posture kind of affects all your body's hormonal systems and all that stuff, which I'm sure at some point in the future will be identified as having something to do with all these ionic systems we just learned about, if I'm keeping it super real. So that said, there you have a marked increase in testosterone, decrease in cortisol when you assume a larger posture for at least 2 minutes. So you can do this if you're in public. You can do this if you're at home. This. Get big, take up space. That's the main, most important point. Okay? Spread out your legs, spread out your hips. That's the goal we're trying to accomplish here, is to take up that space. So, with that said, let's take up some space. Let's take that breath. Let's first be grateful for this agglomeration of cells cooperating together that causes us to have a body, that causes us to have a brain, that therefore can house our mind, can house our spirit, can give us this contiguous conscious experience that allows us to have something that we can then after edit and refine and create to our own will. That allows us to have a will, that allows us to awaken this morning, to draw breath into our lungs, that our heart pumps and beats and bioelectrically places that field around us that determines how our body grows. Let's be grateful for all that. Let's be grateful for all those gifts that were given us that we did not have to figure out ourselves, because they far surpass and exceed our mere mortal boundaries of knowledge and intelligence. In our gratitude, then, let's feel that connection that we have through that bioelectric field, through that living field of energy that's expressed through and around our body, to all of the sources that come to shape us, come to compose us, come to influence us, come to constitute us, come to inform us, come to empower us. Let's attune ourselves to those. Let's open ourselves to those. Let's receive those into ourselves and allow them to enliven us. Allow them, permit them, submit to their blessings, their empowerment, their strengthening, their amplifying, their stimulating, their encouraging, their germinating, they're causing to change, they're causing to boil over, they're bringing across the threshold. Let's submit and release and allow to all those powers and energies that compose us and constitute us, invigorate us and give us breath of life and cogency of mind, to fully stimulate, invigorate, empower, and complete us. That our energies be whole, restored, and where they are disturbed, let them be returned to perfect balance. And let us therefore harmonize within ourselves, harmonize with each other, harmonize within the world as we move about and through it. And let in that harmonic resonance between us all, we receive and share, breathe in and out, inhale and exhale, through our negative, receptive, and our expressive, positive poles. All those blessings, all those connections, all those relationships, all of that love, that basic energy of connection and attachment, and unity and singularity. Let us receive it, let us project it. Let us give our loving blessings. And when we receive something other than love, let us use that attunement, that capability that we have from those sources greater than us, to transmute it, to reattune it to love before we express it. And given these abilities, let us be grateful. Let us express our gratitude. Let us give our blessings and our thanks to all of the sources that have granted us these capabilities. Let us recognize that being granted these, we have phenomenal power to shape ourselves, our lives, our realities, our worlds, and the universe at large. Let us receive and transmute and transmit. Let us be grateful for the blessings that we've received, and let us bless all the things for which we are grateful. And let us all say, Amen. Cool, gang. Well, thanks for rocking with me. It's cool to see how many people hang for meditation and then tune out for prayers. Then again, we did click past an hour there, so people were probably like, oh, I got to go do stuff. Well, thanks for hanging. Thanks for praying with us. Okay, I just had to make sure I wasn't muted for that whole time. We'll see you all tomorrow. Oh, tonight, Sacred Scripture Circle. Dr. Cosmic and I will be back. We'll see you tonight. Make sure that you've given us a follow or a subscribe. If you haven't subscribed to us on Twitch, please take a moment and click that subscribe button. Even if you have followed, that is something different. If you're an Amazon Prime member, it doesn't cost you anything. Just click Prime subscription. If not, I think the lowest level is like $2 or something like that. But that helps support the channel, helps keep you informed of when we go live. Don't forget, support the stream up here. That's how we keep this whole thing going. Now that we've made it completely free for everyone to access, your contributions are literally the only thing that makes this thing keep happening. We love seeing you guys. We love you guys. We love that you're undertaking this journey with us. Let's all continue to grow and discover and improve ourselves and our worlds together. I bless you all.